Carter had no real grasp of true isolation until the forest muffled the final echoes of the highway behind him. He'd pulled his battered pickup to the terminus of a slim dirt track slicing through the national park, shut off the motor, and emerged into a quiet so profound it pressed on his eardrums like an invisible force. Not a trace of far-off vehicles or urban buzz, just the subtle sigh of breeze through the evergreens and the sporadic groan of limbs scraping in the gloom farther out. That's precisely what he'd sought. He'd mentioned to his buddies that he craved a couple of days to reset his mind, but that was the sanitized tale. Reality was far more tangled. The split with his partner, mounting work pressures, endless pings from his devices, and that nagging sense of perpetual scrutiny, critique, and rivalry in the digital glare had frayed him to the brink. Here, no bars, no connectivity, no audience to impress. Only a basic shelter, a bedroll, a portable burner, and the even spot he'd selected roughly half a mile off the access path. Dusk was falling as he wrapped up his setup. The heavens visible through the branches shifted from amber to indigo, with shadows stretching long over the woodland earth. He collected sufficient fallen branches for a simple blaze, heated water for packaged ramen, and dined amid the dance of the embers. The atmosphere held that crisp, chilly aroma of resin and soil. And for the first time in ages, his breaths eased into a semblance of peace. Once the final traces of daylight vanished, night descended abruptly. Overhead in the glade, constellations pierced the foliage in scattered patterns. Yet amid the trunks, obscurity reigned, dense, impenetrable, total. His modest circle of illumination stood like a lone outpost. Past its uneven boundary, vision faltered after mere paces, dissolving into vague forms. As he finished his meal, he tuned into the nocturnal chorus. Chirps from hidden bugs, calls from invisible fowl, faint patters from tiny creatures in the brush. Everyday woodland sounds, routine, benign. He whispered that reassurance to himself repeatedly. Post-meal, he stirred the coals, tossed in a few extra sticks, and reclined against his gear. The flames crackled and murmured. Sparks ascended and dissolved. His device, defiantly displaying zero coverage, rested screen down nearby. The hush was so utter that minor disturbances rang out louder. The clink of his pot, the swish of his coat, the snap of earth beneath him as he adjusted. That's how he caught the unfamiliar noise so soon. Initially, he dismissed it as an illusion from the blaze, perhaps a glint or burst of ash. But then it shifted. A tiny gleam amid the trees, close to the soil, unwavering, unlike any ember. It pulsed faintly, yet without the wild irregularity of combustion. It shone with an odd, gentle constancy, a muted amber reminiscent of a distant lamp viewed through mist. Carter knit his brow and bent ahead, peering into the void. The glow lingered there, still, perhaps 30 or 40 yards past the tree line. He reasoned it must be fellow outdoorsmen, or a trekker's flashlight, or an official on evening rounds. But the position didn't fit. He'd scouted the vicinity around his spot prior to twilight, and that way lay only thick woods. No path, no route, no designated area. "Quote 0, he shouted, his words frail against the immense blackness. No reply from the light. It didn't sway to the pace of footsteps. It just floated, calm, and watchful, just outside the fire's grasp. He fixed on it for a solid minute, hoping it'd clarify into rationality, but it stayed a faceless dot amid the bowls. At last he shook it off and compelled his gaze elsewhere. Likely just a figure far off in the trees. Shadows and moonlight could deceive anyone deep in the forest after dark. He recalled reading something like that. Anyway, if it were a human, they'd respond. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter. Gazing at nothing wouldn't get him any rest. Yet he felt the fine hairs on his arms standing up, and a chill prickled across the nape of his neck, some primal warning he couldn't pinpoint. He damped down the flames a bit more, slipped inside his shelter, and sealed the entrance tight. Within the synthetic confines, the outside world softened to a muted amber haze, illuminated by the fire's fading embers. He spread out his bedroll, stretched out in all his clothes, and concentrated on steadying his breaths. Inhale via the nostrils, exhale past the lips. The enclosed space, so routine and confining, suddenly seemed flimsy against the vast blackness beyond, insubstantial and easily breached. Some time passed before he stirred awake, unsure of the reason. The blaze had dwindled to a slender row of embers, and the chill seeped through the tent, his exhales forming wispy clouds before him. He remained motionless for an instant, thrown off by the hush, pondering if his subconscious had pulled him from slumber because the woods had altered somehow. That's when it registered. Not an audible noise, but a hue. A subtle radiance seeping through the material from the left side, wan and unnatural. Nothing like the warm remnants of coals. It throbbed once, languid and purposeful, resembling a slow respiration. He shifted to face it and fixed his eyes on the canvas. The illumination flickered, adjusted, then held firm, forming a vague orb roughly the span of his hand. It originated beyond the wall, near ground level, and it was drifting. His throat tightened, parched. He eased the zipper open a fraction, peering through the narrow opening. The blackness outside loomed like a barrier. For a few moments, all he discerned was void amid the fire's irritable remnants. Then the gleam edged into sight between a pair of trunks at the clearing's fringe. Now, it was nearer. Far nearer. It floated roughly 3 feet above the earth, vivid enough to outline the tree it obscured. The rough bark traced faint streaks of that eerie pallor. No obvious origin, no lantern frame, no figure bearing it. Just a ball of muted yellow luminescence, as if a flame had been freed from its enclosure and left dangling in the void. "Hey!" he shouted once more, his voice sharper. "Who's there?" The glow intensified briefly, then angled. It didn't sway like a suspended item. It rotated, almost as if a face had swiveled in his direction. Tension gripped every fiber of him. In that instant, he understood he'd been viewing it as mere apparatus, an inanimate curiosity. But its motion carried purpose, a deliberate reaction. He tugged the zipper all the way, willing his fingers to stay firm, and emerged into the frigid evening. His breaths hung in the crisp air, sting in his face. He fished the torch from his pack and directed it straight at the anomaly. The ray swept across foliage, soil, and the fire's rim, striking everywhere but the floating orb. Wherever the light grazed it, the glow seemed to fade, to diffuse, yet it resisted total erasure. as though the beam couldn't quite connect, glancing aside to highlight the surroundings. "All right, that's hilarious," he muttered, his mind grasping for humor amid the bafflement. "If this is a setup, you've got me good. You really—" A second gleam ignited to his right, followed by a third perched higher in the limbs, then one more at his back, starting dim before clarifying. Within under 10 seconds, 6 such ethereal orbs dotted the perimeter of his campsite, positioned at varying elevations and ranges. None bobbed in the rhythm of footsteps. They floated gracefully, decelerated, and halted with an eerie fluidity that sent shivers through him. Carter pivoted gradually, pulse racing, attempting to monitor them simultaneously. With each rotation, one invariably slipped from the corner of his eye, evading direct focus for long. A nauseating realization hit. They weren't scattered at random. They were encircling him. The woods had gone utterly still, no chirps from bugs, no scurry of creatures, not a whisper from the breeze. Only the subdued pop of the fading fire and his labored gasps broke the quiet. He aimed the torch at the closest one, steeled himself, and advanced. The light danced over twigs and dirt. The circle wavered with his unsteady grip. The suspended radiance remained fixed, lingering past the closest trunk. 10 paces, 8, 5. At 3, he ought to have been able to brush against its source, yet emptiness awaited. No body, no gadget, merely vacant space and a bunch of sagging pine fronds. The glow dangled before the bark like an airy spark. His torch flickered out abruptly. Night crashed in so swiftly, it felt like a shroud had been draped over him. The faint glow from the orbs was all that pierced the darkness now, their light intensifying slightly and throwing eerie, distorted silhouettes over the surrounding trees. For an instant, he caught sight of his hand in that eerie radiance, the skin drained of its warmth, with veins pulsing subtly just below, as if glimpsed through murky depths. Then the murmurs began. They arose from all directions simultaneously, trailing him from behind, flanking his sides, drifting overhead. At first they weren't actual words, merely a soft, layered susurrus reminiscent of a congregation in a cathedral or a multitude inhaling together right past thin barriers. His thoughts grappled with fleeting sounds that coalesced and then faded away. Snatches of his name, echoes of long-forgotten sayings from his past. Reflections of his inner monologue returned in an unfamiliar rhythm. He staggered back until his shoulder collided with the jagged texture of a trunk. The orbs inched nearer, maintaining their unseen perimeter around the campsite. None ventured into the open space, yet with each blink they appeared nearer the boundary. "Enough!" he uttered, his voice fracturing. "Please, just cease!" The murmurs intensified briefly, peaking like a surging tide before dropping into a sharp, slicing quiet. The closest orb lurched skyward abruptly, lingering at the level of human eyes if someone were positioned right at the woodland fringe. It angled once more in that eerie tilt, akin to a head angling curiously toward him. He couldn't recall choosing to flee. In one breath, he was flattened against the bark, pulse thundering, and in the next, he was dashing toward the shelter, soles skidding over fallen needles. The orbs stayed put, neither pursuing nor withdrawing. They remained stationary, observing as he plunged inside, sealed the flap with a frantic tug, and groped in the dark for his bag. His grip found the sleek form of his vehicle keys, clutching them like salvation. The shelter's flimsy material shimmered dimly as a few orbs aligned, their pale auras merging against the canvas sides. Forms twisted and shifted overhead, suggesting presences mere inches distant, prowling in orbit. The murmurs resumed, quieter this time, evoking a melody twisted backward into a cradle song. He compelled steady breaths. Inhale, exhale, repeat. The vehicle was reachable. Just a half-mile trek along the direct route he'd traversed under sunlight. His bag held a headlight. The truck had a spare beam inside. There was zero cause to linger in this fragile enclosure as those uncanny gleams encroached. With a fierce yank, he tore open the entrance and exploded into the open area. All the orbs ignited simultaneously. For a searing instant, everything blazed in pale gold. He shielded his gaze as though facing raw sun, sensing an intensity like proximity to a blazing furnace, not true warmth, but an oppressive force, the sense of an immense, uncaring presence hovering unseen. As his sight recovered, the orbs had eased back a touch, retreated to the tree line once more, now still. They were granting distance or permitting escape. He seized the moment. Carter snatched his bag in one fist, abandoning the rest. The shelter, the cooker, the provisions, right where they were. He charged through the foliage break away from the thickest grouping of orbs, feet pounding over brush, limbs whipped by twigs. From behind, the murmurs surged anew, interwoven with a noise that nearly mimicked amusement. The trail to the vehicle stretched twice its prior length from dusk. Lacking illumination, he tripped repeatedly, snagging on concealed roots, slipping in soft earth. On 2 occasions, he crashed heavily enough to gash his hands raw, yet, each time, he hauled upright and pressed on. The timber on both flanks appeared to undulate, shades flickering at vision's periphery. Whenever he dared peer back, there they were. Not near, not in pursuit, but trailing. A scattered band of orbs weaving amid the stems, respecting some unseen limit without fully lagging. They shifted in formations evoking submerged swimmers or avian swarms viewed through water, fluid, synchronized, profoundly otherworldly. At last, he emerged onto the access lane, spotting the shadowed bulk of his truck exactly as parked, and his limbs almost buckled. He dropped the keys twice in his haste to unlock it, hurled himself in, and engaged the latch with a trembling palm. The cabin carried scents of grit and stale brew. Its everyday quality nearly brought tears. He thrust the key home. For a harrowing beat, silence reigned. Then the motor grumbled to life, hesitated, and roared. The beams ignited, slicing dual paths into the ahead woods. Under their stark illumination, the area seemed mundane once more. No gleams, no figures, just stems, limbs, and dim spots. He shifted into drive and accelerated. He avoided the wing mirrors. He ignored the central view. He kept his gaze locked on the thin band of gravel and soil right ahead, refusing to glance away until the fire road ejected him onto the main highway, flanked by glowing reflective signs and the far-off shimmer of city lights. It wasn't until his speedometer edged beyond 50 that he dared a quick peek in the rearview mirror. Way back at the spot where the dark opening of the fire road joined the asphalt, he spotted them, a group of dim, floating lights lingering just past the reach of his headlights. They hovered there, tiny and unwavering, resembling watchful eyes peering from the world's brink. Gradually, each one faded and disappeared. Back at his place, Carter skipped sleep entirely. He abandoned his equipment in the truck, headed directly into his apartment, and planted himself at the kitchen table through the night, the blinds left parted to a sky gradually brightening along the horizon. His hands trembled as he attempted to sip some water. Whenever a vehicle drove by outside, its beams sweeping over the walls, his pulse faltered. Once he settled enough to reflect, he attempted to convince himself it was simply a collective illusion. Perhaps fellow campers with lanterns or drone beams, or a weary brain's ploy to flee the grind of routine. Yet inwardly, he realized the true source of his dread wasn't the sheer unbelievability of the sighting. It was that sense of mild interest, not fury or aggression, but intrigue, akin to how folks peer into a fish tank and nudge the glass, observing the tiny creatures dart and scatter in bewilderment. Savannah believed she understood true quiet until her initial solitary evening in the cabin. The place was her elder brother Marcus's, acquired 2 years prior as his so-called artistic sanctuary. Positioned 20 meters from the closest settlement and nestled within a thick woodland crease, it had no apparent neighbors, and the rutted driveway demanded 15 minutes of cautious navigation to arrive at the entrance. Marcus was away in Europe for 3 weeks on work matters and had requested she house-sit to care for his German shepherd Bailey, who fared poorly in boarding facilities. She accepted without hesitation. The schedule aligned ideally. Unemployed and unattached, she was mired in a vague malaise where even browsing feeds drained her energy. Several weeks amid trees, novels, and a mannerly pup seemed the ideal rejuvenation. The opening pair of days unfolded without incident. She adopted an easy rhythm, coffee on the veranda each morning, extended hikes with Bailey along the wild logging paths traversing the land. Afternoons involved lounging in the spacious chair beside the pane, absorbed in a book. The cabin was unpretentious yet cozy, featuring broad wooden flooring, a firewood hearth, and sturdy barriers that dulled all external noises to a remote hush. Bailey proved ideal companionship, trailing her between spaces, ever vigilant yet calm. It was during the 3rd evening that she decided to activate the trail cameras. Marcus had alluded to them casually prior to departing, 4 rugged units affixed to trunks encircling the grounds to capture animal activity. He drew inspiration from the shots for his artwork, mainly deer and foxes, though he occasionally nabbed a bear or coyote by chance. Triggered by motion, the devices captured brief video segments complete with sound for anything stirring nearby. He demonstrated extracting the SD cards and viewing clips on his computer. "Take a look while you're there," he'd suggested. Quote 8. She hadn't intended to fiddle with them until Bailey behaved oddly that 3rd night. The dog had been sprawled on the mat by the stove when she abruptly raised her head, ears perking with sharp predatory attention. That indicated an external sound. Savannah set aside her reading and strained to hear, but the woods outside the panes yielded only the familiar gentle whisper of breeze through leaves. "What's up, girl?" she queried. Bailey rose, approached the entryway, and fixed her gaze on it. Her tail remained still. No whimpers or yaps escaped her. She simply remained upright, tense, boring into the solid timber as though peering beyond. After an extended pause, she snorted softly, pivoted, and returned to the mat without reclining. Instead, she sat upright, attentive, ears at the ready. A chill of discomfort tingled along Savannah's spine. She rose, seized the robust flashlight Marcus stashed near the entrance, and ventured onto the deck. The evening atmosphere was chilly and moist, saturated with pine scent and damp soil. She arced the light over the open area before the cabin. Foliage, silhouettes, a subtle gleam from the distant outbuilding's top. No motion stirred. She lingered a full minute more, then retreated indoors and secured the lock. Come morning, she resolved to inspect the trail cameras. Perhaps one of the dogs had sensed the same noise Bailey caught. She tugged on her boots, attached the leash to the collar, and patrolled the edges of the land, retrieving the SD cards from every camera. The woods seemed altered in the morning light, far less heavy. Birds chirped amid the speckled sunbeams, restoring a sense of normalcy to it all. Once inside the cabin, she inserted the initial card into Marcus's computer and accessed the directory of recordings. The majority were brief snippets of emptiness, gusts rustling limbs, a squirrel scampering through the shot, a raccoon nosing around a trunk's roots. She skimmed them rapidly, hardly noticing, until she hit a recording marked at 3:14 a.m. from the unit overlooking the cabin's rear. She hit play. The video was fuzzy, bleached by the night vision infrared. The opening moments revealed no motion. Abruptly, a shape entered from the left. It was Savannah. She went rigid, eyes locked on the monitor. Undoubtedly no doubt about it. Identical stature, identical frame, clad in the baggy flannel top and sweats from bedtime. Yet she had zero recollection of exiting the place, no memory of venturing outdoors whatsoever. In the footage, this duplicate of herself advanced leisurely, in a trance-like manner, her uncovered feet navigating roots and downed twigs with care. Her head was cocked a bit as though attuned to some sound. Arms dangled relaxed by her flanks. She proceeded directly into the tree line with the effortless, composed assurance of someone fully aware of her destination. The lens recorded just roughly 10 seconds before she vanished into the foliage outside its reach. Savannah looped the segment thrice, her heartbeat accelerating each time. She examined the remaining feeds. The driveway-facing one had recorded her passing by at 3:11 a.m., en route to the rear grounds. The side yard view depicted her descending the deck at 3:09 a.m., progressing deliberately, as if drawn forward. But the most unsettling footage originated from the front entrance camera. It captured her disengaging the lock from within at 3:06 a.m., emerging onto the veranda and halting. Amid the hush of the night vision recording, she remained utterly motionless for almost 20 seconds, head tilted in apparent attention. Then, distinctly, she swiveled toward the device, straight at the objective as if pinpointing its position, and grinned. It wasn't her grin. The stretch was overly broad, unnaturally deliberate, the lips' edges rising in a robotic fashion. Her gaze, dull and mirroring in the infrared, stayed unblinking. She pivoted then, and descended the steps, heading rearward. Savannah shut the computer and remained motionless, working to calm her breaths. She recalled nothing of the episode. She'd retired near 11 o'clock, perused a book for perhaps 30 minutes, and dozed off with Bailey nestled at the bed's end. She hadn't stirred until the 7 o'clock alarm. Her soles were spotless, no soil anywhere, garments unmarked by grime. The entry had been secured when she descended that morning. She convinced herself it must be an error. Perhaps the devices glitched, timestamps off, or sleepwalking, despite never having experienced it before. But deep down, she recognized that grin for what it was. That night she secured all entrances and panes. She jammed a chair against the main knob and another at the rear. Bailey stayed by her side, her palm on the pup's crown, while attempting to read, unable to grasp even one line. Dusk descended gradually, tinting the glass golden, then amber, then indigo, until the surrounding woods dissolved into utter darkness. By 10 o'clock, drained from the rush of nerves and worry, she ascended to retire. She donned clean attire, verified the bolts once more, and slipped beneath the covers. Phone beside her on the bedside table, bedroom portal ajar to catch any stirrings below. Bailey positioned herself at the mattress's base with a huff, chin atop forepaws. Savannah shut her lids and willed slumber. She jolted awake to the front latch disengaging. Her lids flew wide, pulse surging to her mouth. The dwelling was pitch black, save for a thin lunar gleam seeping past the drapes. She stayed frozen, ears straining, hoping it was delusion. Then the sound repeated, the measured grind of the bolt retracting, succeeded by the faint groan of the frame. Footfalls on the veranda, light and unshod. Bailey raised her muzzle but stayed silent. The hound fixed on the bedroom entrance, ears perked, frame rigid. Savannah compelled motion. She eased from the sheets soundlessly, snatched her cell, and inched to the stairhead. The lower level loomed as a pit of gloom. She barely discerned the outline of the front door, now ajar, forming a rectangle of marginally brighter shadow against the blackness beyond. A figure lingered in the entrance, not just anyone, her. It remained motionless, outlined by the dim porch light Marcus had set on a timer. Matching stature, matching frame, even the baggy shirt. The head tilted gradually left, then right, as though loosening stiff muscles after a deep slumber. Then it uttered her name, Savannah. The sound was identical to her own. Precise tone, precise rhythm. The soothing, tolerant inflection she reserved for luring Bailey indoors post-stroll. Come along, Savannah. It's time to leave. Her throat tightened. Breath escaped her. Paralysis gripped her. The silhouette pivoted faintly, glancing back toward the trees before descending the steps and vanishing from view. Moments passed in stillness. Then the call echoed once more, softer, wafting through the ajar door. Savannah, come on. I'm right here. Instinct propelled her legs before her mind registered. She staggered rearward, almost tumbling over Bailey, and forced the bedroom door closed. Trembling hands required 3 attempts to engage the latch. She leaned against the panel and collapsed to the floor, gripping her phone tightly. Below, the entrance groaned anew. Footfalls crossed the entryway. Measured, purposeful, naked soles on polished wood. The voice resounded nearer at the foot of the staircase. "Savannah, why hide away? You've descended before. You always do." She clamped her knuckles between her teeth to stifle any noise. Bailey emitted a deep, unfamiliar growl from her chest. The pup positioned herself guardedly between Savannah and the door. Fur bristled. The steps ascended the stairs. Creak, halt, creak, halt. "I've summoned you endlessly," the voice intoned, but now it warped, like overlapping echoes of her speech, misaligned. "You listen each evening. You always obey." "What's changed tonight?" Savannah groped at her phone, attempting 911, yet her quivering fingers mangled the keys repeatedly. The steps crested the landing. Beneath the door, the shadow wavered, eclipsing the sliver of hall light. "Let me in, Savannah." She shoved harder against the barrier, hoping her pressure might bolster the mechanism. Bailey unleashed a single fierce bark, fangs exposed. The knob twisted. It tugged against the bolt, probing before ceasing. The shadow lingered unmoving. An agonizing hush followed. Then the voice returned, stripped of warmth, dull, icy, inquisitive. You weren't meant to spot the cameras. Tears clouded her sight. She compelled steady breaths, steadied her digits to access the dialer. She rang Marcus. It chimed once, twice, thrice. On the fourth, he answered, drowsy and irritated. "Sav, it's around 5 a.m. over here." "There's something inside," she hissed, voice fracturing. "It mimics my voice. Pretends to be me. Marcus, help me figure this out." Silence stretched on his end. Then urgency sharpened his reply, alertness surging. "Where exactly are you?" "Upstairs bedroom, door secured. It's just beyond. Keep it shut. Police are on the way, don't hang up." She caught his motions, the bedding's swish, his subdued talk to another. Beyond the door, the entity stirred. The shadow withdrew. Steps receded along the corridor, leisurely, then echoed down the stairs in that unyielding cadence. The front door swung wide, then shut. She held the line to her ear, attuned to Marcus liaising with officers via a second call. Bailey remained alert, fixed on the door, though her rumble faded. An age seemed to drag before sirens wailed faintly along the winding drive. When authorities searched the premises at last, the entry stood unlatched and wide. Nothing indicated break-in, no tracks, no proof of intrusion beyond her and the dog. Yet the trail cam video shifted their faces. A seasoned deputy, hair streaked silver, replayed her grin at the lens thrice in quiet. Quote 15. He ventured at length. Quote 16. Quote 17. He inclined his head thoughtfully. Quote 18. She departed shortly after. Bailey beside her up front and stayed away until Marcus's return from Europe a fortnight on. They examined the remaining video recordings together. Each night she spent there, the surveillance had recorded her departing the cabin sometime between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., heading into the forest and coming back right before sunrise. She remembered none of those moments. Marcus put the place on the market 6 months afterward. He refused to explain his reasons, but Savannah understood after they looked at the last evening's clip, the one from the camera positioned by the tree line, which had picked up an additional presence. A silhouette lingered among the trees, just past the cabin, observing the dwelling. It matched her stature and frame, clad in her outfit, even though she had already gone. Tyler generally chose to hunt solo. He explained to others that he enjoyed the silence, the concentration, the fulfillment of depending solely on his abilities rather than conversing in a hide with a companion. There was some validity in that. The real reason ran deeper. The wilderness was the sole environment where he escaped the sense of constant underachievement. In those surroundings, the demands were straightforward. Gauge the breeze, honor the terrain, take responsible shots, and process your harvest properly. It was the middle of October when he set out for the national forest in the pre-dawn hours. His bow, backpack, and tree-climbing aids were carefully arranged in the truck bed. A passing cold snap had cooled things sufficiently to fog his exhalations as he got out, while the eastern horizon showed only the faintest hint of lightning. He pulled into a familiar gravel turnout he'd utilized for years, shouldered his load, and began the roughly 1-mile trek to a ridgeline he'd surveyed the previous week. The forest stirred with life, yet in a restrained manner. An owl's hoot echoed faintly from afar. Nearby, a twig snapped under the steps of some minor creature rustling through the brush. He appreciated those subtle, authentic noises, the natural activities of wildlife without interference. No motors, no devices, no crowds. It required around 45 minutes to arrive at his chosen spot, a stretch of softly rolling inclines intersected by an abandoned logging path that nature had largely reclaimed. Deer favored navigating those subtle valleys, the paths of least effort. He advanced cautiously, avoiding unnecessary rustles of foliage while searching for recent indicators, footprints, scat, scrapes on young trees, the subtle hints that formed a bigger picture. That's when the tree stand caught his eye. It wasn't immediately apparent. He first noticed it as an unnatural dark form amid the upper limbs, a shadow out of place. Drawing back and narrowing his gaze, he discerned the rectangular form of a stand roughly 20 feet high, nestled in the crotch of a sturdy oak. No shiny hardware or gleaming fasteners, nothing to catch the light. The builder clearly understood the craft. Tyler's brow furrowed. The rules in this forest zone were firm on elevated platforms. They required labeling with the user's name and authorization code, couldn't remain indefinitely, and had to stay clear of a specified radius from disused trails like that logging route. This setup appeared enduring, aged, integrated into the tree. He nearly continued on his way. Encountering another person's rig wasn't against the rules, and dedicated outdoorsmen typically honored one another's territories. Yet, an odd detail about the stand bothered him. Its orientation faced away from the clear game path, pointing instead at the densest thicket where sight lines were poor. It felt like it was monitoring the old road more than any potential quarry. He reasoned with himself that he merely intended to inspect for a label, ensuring he wouldn't encroach unintentionally. That provided a logical justification to appease his instinct for staying out of others' affairs. He detached the climbing sticks from his pack and ascended the bowl methodically, securing each piece with familiar precision. Upon nearing the platform, he halted on the top segment and took in the view. The structure was bigger than average, clearly handmade, featuring a cushioned chair and protective barrier. A camo cover lay bundled above, set to unfurl against foul conditions. A little peg jutted from a nearby bow for suspending gear. And right there on the deck lay a standard olive-green duffel of moderate size. No label, no license, nothing to identify the owner. Tyler hoisted himself aboard, shifting his balance carefully, then knelt to examine the bag. It was fastened shut, but unsecured. The prudent move would have been to ignore it. If a park officer spotted him rummaging through another's belongings, it could spell trouble. But the vague discomfort had intensified into a denser weight, a tightness in his torso akin to the hush preceding a downpour. He pulled open the zipper. Within lay field glasses, a distance measurer, and assorted practical tools. A vacuum flask, extra handwear, a compact weather shield. Beneath them, enclosed in a plain shopping sack, was an item that parched his throat. A premium digital single-lens reflex camera fitted with an extended telephoto. Affixed to its frame was a strip of adhesive tape bearing a date scrawled in permanent ink. The date from the prior week. He powered it up. The power source was almost at capacity. Tyler flipped through the pictures, anticipating shots of deer, wild turkeys, or perhaps trail glimpses of coyotes. The initial ones matched that expectation. Stands of trees, open glades, a deserted logging path captured at various hours. Suddenly, the focus shifted to humans. The debut human capture showed a man around 30 trudging along the weed-choked road, backpack slung over his shoulders, gaze fixed downward. The image was sharp, the illumination ideal, almost like a wildlife specialist documenting the essence of a woodland trekker. But this wasn't creative work. Following shots drew nearer incrementally, the fellow's features, his pack's label, an intimate view of the blister on his right hand from clutching the walking stick. Tyler swiped to the following frame. Now a woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, solitary with earphones plugged in, running along that same path. Her ponytail froze in motion, her face at ease. The perspective indicated the shooter positioned higher and a bit to her rear, probably right from this hunting perch. Each sequence adhered to that formula, an isolated individual on the logging route, starting broad, then narrowing in, as if scrutinizing particulars. Occasionally, the viewpoint altered, hinting the camera operator had descended and approached stealthily. Scores of solo wanderers appeared, nearly all oblivious to the observation. A shiver unrelated to the crisp autumn breeze crept along Tyler's back. He gulped and pressed on. The urge to quit was overpowered by a fiercer curiosity. Nearing the card's conclusion, the images altered once more. Arrangements grew sloppier, rushed, out-of-focus renderings of those same visages, but from strange perspectives. A few half-hidden by foliage, others snapped from unprecedented proximity. One set depicted a teenage lad bearing a fishing pole, veering from the logging road onto a slim animal path. The opener framed him from the knees upward. The second cropped at his torso. The finale in that batch showed just his locks and nape at the frame's lower edge, suggesting the lens was hoisted hastily as its wielder advanced. After that, silence. No further shots of the youth. Tyler's pulse hammered in his ears. He pulled back to the grid view and scanned. Multiple threads concluded similarly. a figure straying into the underbrush, capped by a terminal near miss where they scarcely registered, followed by total absence in subsequent picks. Intervals of a couple days separated the clusters, per the timestamps. He reassured himself it signified nothing definitive. Folks deviated from paths routinely to answer nature's call, scout a meadow, or track a stream. Perhaps the shooter simply stowed the device. End of story. Yet, recalling the multitude of lost hiker flyers pinned at trailheads across the years, his gut twisted. At the sack's base, under a balled-up plaid shirt, lay a compact spiral notebook, pocket-sized. Early pages held routine hunt logs, dates, hours, skies, fauna encounters. Midway, the tone pivoted. Listings emerged, kicked off by date and spot. October 2, male, roughly 30, solo trek, blue Osprey pack, right knee support, silver Subaru at Lot C, brisk pace, back same day. October 5, female, about 24, jogging, white earbuds, no apparent armament or mace, red Honda Civic at Overlook beyond mile 12, weekend regular. October 9th, male teen, angling kit, budget pole, no phone in sight, older truck with local high school decal, trails east along creek. Beneath every profile sat observations on routines, arrival times, music preferences, phone glances, scanning habits versus tunnel vision. Certain ones ended with a lone circled term. Promising. Tyler slammed the notebook closed, creasing pages. His palms grew damp with perspiration, ignoring the fall nip. No sleuth himself, he'd absorbed plenty of cop chatter at kin reunions to recognize the implications. An individual had perched in this tree, inventorying passers-by, dissecting behaviors, flagging select ones for deeper intrigue, and in a spot where echoes faded quick and visitors were sparse. The forest, once a sanctuary, now brimmed with unseen vantage points. He sealed the pack and hunkered down, pondering delivery to a park warden or county law. Crystal clear. But an intrusive notion muscled forward, unwanted yet persistent. With the gear abandoned here and the platform so pristine, its proprietor likely hadn't abandoned it, implying proximity. Tyler eased his gaze upward and strained to hear. The woodland replied with its familiar noises. A breeze rustling through, the soft scolding of a squirrel nearby, the far-off drumming of a woodpecker, yet no crunch of boots on leaves, no crack of a branch breaking. Even so, every fiber of his being warned that eyes were on him now, just as he had scrutinized those images on the camera display. His bow lay propped against the platform's edge, easy to grab. The rational voice in his head urged him to grab the pack and journal, descend the ladder and head directly to his vehicle at an even stride. Avoid running. Don't behave like something hunted. Simply depart. He slung the duffel's strap across his back, grabbed his bow securely, and lowered himself from the stand onto the uppermost climbing peg. The metal groaned faintly beneath him. He halted, pulse racing, straining for any reaction to the noise. Silence. Only the wind, once more. He made his way down as soundlessly as possible, each step measured. When his feet hit solid earth at last, his knees trembled as if they might buckle. He drew in a deep, slow breath, then repeated it, compelling himself to pause and scan the surroundings one final time before proceeding. A blue jay shrieked abruptly from his left, its piercing, scolding cry signaling distress. Another echoed it from deeper in the woods. The calls reverberated among the trunks, sharpening the atmosphere. It might have been triggered by anything. A fox, an eagle, or perhaps a human. Tyler began to move. He avoided the straightest path to his truck, opting instead for a broader curve that exploited the terrain's dips and denser thickets for concealment. Every few steps he shifted direction subtly, enough to force any distant observer to reposition constantly if they hoped to follow his trail. The bag weighed on him now, like incriminating proof, rather than mere equipment. Once, he risked a look behind, spotting nothing at first. Then, high on the hillside, a brief flash of motion caught his eye. A silhouette, half hidden by limbs, positioned next to the oak that held the stand. The range blurred any specifics, stature, features, attire, but a gleam of metal flashed by their side, perhaps field glasses or the shine off a rifle barrel. The stranger issued no shout, no gesture, just observation. Tyler kept his gaze forward after that. When he emerged from the tree line at last and spotted his truck parked on the dirt turnout, a wave of relief nearly buckled his legs. He fumbled the key into the lock, flung the duffel onto the seat beside him, and slid behind the wheel. For a moment, he remained motionless, fingers gripping the wheel until his knuckles blanched, attuned to the engine's residual ticks and the faint whisper of foliage in the distance. Then, he turned the ignition and pulled away. He held to the speed limit, the tires thrumming evenly over the rough pavement, his attention darting from the path ahead to the mirror behind. The bordering woods along the access road loomed nearer than before, pressing inward. At the outpost marking the forest's boundary, he turned in without pause. The on-duty ranger absorbed Tyler's account in deepening quiet as he set the journal and camera on the desk. The officer's expression hardened while paging through the entries. Upon viewing the images, his teeth ground together. "Stay put," the ranger murmured, "and repeat this to the sheriff precisely when he arrives. Got it?" Tyler dipped his head in agreement. His throat was parched. Words stuck. Over the ensuing months, snippets emerged via media updates, whispers, and probes into odd occurrences across the national forest. Officials pursued clues tied to multiple hikers vanished in the prior 3 years. Early on, no captures surfaced, no neat conclusions emerged. Yet what lingered sharpest for him wasn't the formal reports. It was the recollection of peering from that perch at the snapshots, grasping how someone had lingered in the very quiet he cherished, spying on folks as trackers' eye game, and the persistent doubt that a different slope that dawn, another woodland spot, might have left that blind undiscovered entirely. Brooklyn had trekked enough trails to rarely encounter the unexpected in the wild. Raised amid winding paths and contour charts, she devoted college weekends to leading groups on short outings, and now pushing 30, she viewed her lone overnights as a form of mindful wandering. The guidelines were ingrained. Share your itinerary with another. Pack extra tools for wayfinding, heed forecasts, and absolutely resist straying from marked routes on impulse. That final principle guided her as she spread the terrain map over her lap on a lichen-draped stump, following the slender crimson path outlining her 3-day circuit. Afternoon light of early autumn sifted down through towering pines and hemlocks, casting a verdant, balmy glow through the branches. In the vicinity, a stream bubbled beneath a layer of rocks. The GPS attached to her shoulder strap matched the map's details perfectly. She had reached the precise location expected. The guidebook referenced an abandoned fire road crossing the path several miles further on, now thick with overgrowth and largely swallowed by the woods. It made no mention of buildings, no huts, no ranger outposts, no private holdings. Thus, 2 hours later, when she rounded a curve and spotted the cabin, she froze in place. Nestled in a slight depression roughly 50 yards from the path, it was partly hidden by sapling spruces, far from a wreck. This wasn't some crumbling remnant with a collapsed roof and a chimney overrun by moss. The shingles formed a complete covering, darkened yet sturdy. The timber walls bore a faded gray patina, but their outlines remained crisp, joints secure. A brief flight of stairs ascended to a modest veranda. And through one of the forward panes, veiled by dust, a soft amber glow emanated. Brooklyn rubbed her eyes and glanced back at the map. Empty space. The elevation markings swept across this area without any icon for a building. She magnified the GPS display. It revealed only a broad expanse of verdure. The path, the stream, nothing more. She verified the power and signal strength. Everything checked out. "All right," she whispered to herself, peering once more at the cabin. That's odd. Her initial suspicion was that it could be unmarked private territory. Yet no barriers appeared, no warning placards, no utility wires snaking toward it. The illumination in the glass held steady, not dancing like flame, but too gentle for harsh electric beams. Perhaps an oil lamp, or a compact generator humming within. She lingered on the trail for a solid minute, weighing options. The wisest choice was to press on. The circuit was extensive, and daybreak always slipped away quicker than anticipated, but the structure tugged at her inquisitiveness. From her years in hiking circles, she knew unlisted refugees cropped up occasionally, vintage trapper huts or hunter blinds that served as havens during foul weather or crises. If that's what this was, it deserved a note. Just a peek from the entrance, she resolved. Nothing more. She veered from the path. The terrain shifted right away. The firm soil and stray roots of the trodden route yielded to a cushioned layer of pine needles and moist foliage. The atmosphere grew a touch chillier, daylight dimming as branches intertwined above. She navigated amid the trees, her footwear pressing into the softness with every stride, gaze alternating between the cabin and the path to maintain orientation. Midway across, the woods fell still. The change crept in gently, akin to a distant latch snapping shut. Avian calls ebbed. The buzz of bugs softened. Her footsteps' quiet snaps and the rustle of pack straps against her back were all that remained. She halted and pivoted. The trail persisted in view, a earthy vein pulsing through the foliage. Past it, the woodland ascended in mellow inclines. The scene looked unaltered, but a profound shift hung in the air. Quote, _21_, she chided inwardly, coaxing a chuckle that echoed harshly in the quiet. You're merely 30 feet astray, not lost in some parallel realm. The cabin loomed ahead, serene and compact, now just 20 yards distant. Examined closely, It seemed even further from forsaken decay. The veranda boards showed recent clearing, scant litter upon them. The lone rocker by the entrance stood firm, free of decay's sag. A steel clasp beside the frame secured a loop of cordage, edges still intact. The lit window bore smudges, yet not enough to obscure hints inside. A desk, a ledge, possibly apparel draped on a hook. Brooklyn ascended the risers cautiously, probing each. They supported her weight solidly. Upon reaching the landing, she edged along the wall, her backpack grazing the siding as she stretched to peer through the glass. The radiance stemmed from a tabletop fixture, its cover askew. No stirrings, no noises. _quote_22_ she ventured, adopting that courteous, hesitant tone for potential trespasses. Quote 23. She paused amid the quiet perspiration prickling beneath the straps across her back. Quote 24. She continued. Quote 25. No reply came. A fleeting notion crossed her mind. Perhaps this was a setup for a frightful attraction. An elaborate, interactive scare. She brushed it off at once. Miles from any roadway, no feasible way for teams to construct such a thing, and no lenses in sight, no faux elements, no contrived eeriness. In truth, the cabin's plain, everyday quality disturbed her the deepest. Her eyes wandered to the doorknob. Plain brass, dulled by time, the sort stocked in every supply shop. A piece of string was looped around the doorknob's base, dangling loosely with a ragged end, suggesting it had once secured a key. It swayed subtly in a breeze she couldn't feel, brushing lightly against the wooden frame. She ought to go. Every guideline from those wilderness safety talks warned against venturing into unfamiliar buildings by herself. Yet a subtler, more instinctual idea wormed its way in. Suppose there was a visitor's log waiting inside. Some ranger's note clarifying its absence from the charts. Or perhaps a cache of survival gear that could prove vital if the skies darkened. Her fingers closed on the handle without her fully committing. It rotated smoothly. The door swung inward on well-lubricated hinges, silent, without any groan or resistance. A draft kissed her cheek, chilled and arid, laced with traces of dust, aged timber, and an elusive tang. Perhaps iron, or a sterile scent like disinfectant. "Hello?" she said once more, crossing just over the sill. The space inside formed a single, expansive chamber. To her right, a lantern on the desk emitted a gentle light, its wire trailing to a compact power unit below. Along the back wall, racks held orderly piles of tinned food, containers of water, and coiled bedding. Against the facing side stood a slim bunk, neatly arranged with fresh linens and a wool coverlet tucked at the end. No spider webs, no traces of vermin, nothing indicating prolonged neglect. This shelter saw frequent use. Still, it lacked any personal touches. No scattered items, no pictures, no garments draped casually. Even the jacket visible earlier through the glass was a plain black shell, fastened and suspended rigidly. She was on the verge of retreating when the documents on the desk caught her eye. A modest pile anchored by a polished stone from the river. Drawn by curiosity she couldn't suppress, she approached. The uppermost page featured a pencil illustration, an intricate outline of the hut and nearby woods, observed from an elevated spot among the branches. The viewpoint was exact, nearly like a blueprint. The next page depicted the same structure from a different vantage, now including a small silhouette. A figure caught in motion on the veranda. The third image sent a chill gripping her neck. It portrayed her own likeness. Identical pack, cap, and ponytail draped across one arm. She was positioned on the path, one leg raised as though halted in her stride, chin angled precisely as when consulting her navigator. The detail was startling, even noting the minor crook in her right little finger from a past injury. At the sheet's base, in tidy script, appeared today's date. Brooklyn felt a wave of ice across her flesh. With fingers that seemed abruptly awkward, she turned to the following leaf. It depicted her anew, but nearer this time, as if the hidden illustrator had edged closer. The final page remained incomplete, merely sketching her upper body and hairline. The lines grew fainter, like the work had been cut short. From behind, the floor groaned. The noise resembled a building adjusting to the elements, to shifts in heat, or to timber swelling and shrinking. That's the story she fed herself. But it originated right at her back, not underfoot, and carried the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps moving across planks. She didn't pivot right away. In that taut, fragile instant, she fixed on the partial portrait before her, each pulse thudding distinctly in her chest. What had felt simply peculiar moments ago now resembled a trap she'd entered blindly, ignoring the risks. At last, she rotated. The entrance stood vacant. Past it stretched the deck, then the woods. Yet the impression of another presence hung heavy and acrid in the air. The atmosphere thickened, as if the oxygen had been drawn away and supplanted by a weightier pall. "All right," she declared, her tone wavering as she forced volume. "You've taken in plenty." She retreated to the exit, gaze sweeping the room's edges. No motion stirred. The light buzzed quietly. The darkness beneath the bed remained unchanged. The garment on the hook dangled motionless by the frame. She paused only to stretch out and switch off the lantern. Shadow engulfed part of the interior. The pane turned a dim square, no longer illuminated. As the filament settled with a faint click, an intrusive notion pierced her thoughts. Unbidden. If the place was empty, why had the light been burning upon her arrival? She slipped outside and shut the door with a solid tug, fighting the impulse to bang it. The woodland welcomed her with that eerie quiet she'd observed earlier. Through the foliage, the path emerged, a ribbon of everyday life she craved beyond words just then. She hastened toward it, not sprinting but far from sauntering. After roughly 10 yards, reality altered. Not through noise this time, but a subtle shift in pressure, like passing an unseen divide. Her ears gave a slight pop, akin to those from elevation shifts. The atmosphere eased warmer by a touch. The avian chorus resumed, weaving melodies as though briefly silenced and restarted. Brooklyn ventured onto the path and glanced over her shoulder. The cabin remained in place, compact and isolated, its timber faded to a muted gray amid the surrounding foliage. The pane she'd peered through earlier now stood dark. No motion stirred. No silhouette crossed the window. She lingered there, eyes fixed, hoping for some sign, any indication of life. When silence persisted, she fished her phone from her pocket, aware there'd be no signal. Even so, she launched the compass feature. It whirled briefly before settling. the north bearing aligned directly along the upcoming trail, matching her map precisely. With a measured breath, she tucked the map away and pressed onward. Only that evening, as she spread out her sleeping bag at a marked campground far removed, did the nagging unease crystallize. In her haste to depart the cabin, she'd overlooked the return route. The stretch from the structure to the main path had seemed briefer on the way out than inbound, as though the space itself had shrunk. And as she strained to recall the precise layout of the trees, the unique curl of limbs by the entrance, the terrain's incline beneath her feet, those specifics blurred in her mind, slippery as oil slicking across water, resistant to sharp recollection. A week later, settled back home, she accessed online satellite views of the region, scrutinizing the GPS coordinates logged for that trail segment. There lay the stream, the ridge's undulations, the subtle trace of the disused fire track. But no cabin appeared. Yet one detail in the 2-year-old photo, contrasted with a more recent one, sent chills racing over her skin. A subtle area of thicker gloom emerged right where she'd veered from the path. Not a building, not a defined form, just an intensified blotch within the woods that hadn't existed previously. She snapped the laptop shut and steered clear of that circuit ever after. When companions quizzed her about withholding the tale of the sketches or the incomplete portrait resembling her features, she skipped over the sensation of scrutiny, the tallying of her form and motions by an unseen watcher, be it person or otherwise. She simply noted other routes she was keen to explore. Occasionally, lost in thought during solitary strolls through different forests, she'd spot a quick dart overhead among the boughs or feel distant gazes appraising her. Then she'd quicken her pace, repeating the mantra inwardly, "Stick to the path. Avoid peering too intently at whatever lurks right outside the boundary." Blake often described night angling as serene to others. In reality, he savored the subtle thrill of fear it brought. There was an allure in maneuvering his aging pickup along a tight entry lane until the woods engulfed the final highway lights, silencing the motor and emerging into a darkness ancient and untouched by human hands. His preferred lake nestled at the terminus of a forsaken offshoot, a broad expanse of inky liquid encircled by evergreens that arched inward like curious onlookers. Devoid of vessels or dwellings, merely a crude gravel loop and a slim trail leading to the pebbled edge. He'd spotted it on a chart long ago, verified it during a waning daylight visit. It evolved into his solitary custom. Labor through the weekdays, then cap Friday with solitude there. A pair of poles, an ice chest, a light, perhaps some tranquil moments to wash away the urban clamor. That evening carried the crisp, pristine edge typical of fall's onset. Chilly, yet not biting. Pinpoints of stars already pierced the heavens as he doused his beams and allowed his sight to adapt. The opposite shoreline's silhouette jagged against the softer celestial glow. Crickets trilled. A plunk echoed from the obscure depths, probably a fish pursuing surface insects. He hauled his equipment from the truck's rear, secured the cab out of routine more than need, and descended the slim route to the water's brink. The reservoir sprawled before him, a vast, smooth pane of ebony mirror. He placed his tackle on a level stone, positioned 2 lines against forked branches, and ignited his lamp, dimming it to provide minimal illumination for tasks without spoiling his dark-adapted eyes. The initial hour passed uneventfully. He threaded lures, flung them forth, drew them back. The cord's gentle whisper thrilled him as it sliced the breeze. The light's glow etched a modest ring of amber security nearby. Past its reach, existence dissolved into hints and forms, the deeper bulk of foliage, the brighter swath of firmament, the occasional glint of moonlight on a ripple. He eased into the customary cadence, his tension melting with each languid pull. It began as an intuition prior to manifesting as noise. Initially, his focus merely tugged toward the woods at his back, akin to how a elusive word hovers on the tongue's tip. He'd throw out the line, pause, and catch himself looking back over his shoulder, convinced that the shadows behind him had shifted somehow. Every glance revealed just piled-up trunks and limbs, the woodland floor lost in gloom. He dismissed it as imagination. Darkness messed with everyone's head like that. Then the footfalls echoed in. They originated from the trees, not the water's edge. A deliberate, even tread lingering just outside his lantern's glow, not the quick scamper of a raccoon or a deer's hesitant bounds. These had substance. Each landed with a subtle, gritty scrape, like heavy weight disturbing pebbles beneath. Blake halted, fingers locked on the reel. The steps mirrored his immobility. For an instant, nothing broke the quiet but the lantern's faint sizzle and the gentle lap of waves on stone. He gulped down the dryness in his throat and pivoted carefully toward the tree line. "Quote 29, he shouted. His words came out weaker than intended. Silence greeted him. The pacing didn't pick up again. The woods loomed unmoved, a jagged barrier of ebony. He lingered for 30 more seconds before returning to his setup. Logic pieced together plausible reasons. Perhaps a deer, a bear, or some late-arriving angler from the distant access path. Echoes warped oddly near the lake. He was aware of that. With hands calmer than his racing pulse suggested, he rebaited a hook and flung the line, tracking its curve until it sank into obscurity. The steps resumed precisely 12 seconds afterward. Now the pattern was unmistakable. Step, hesitation, step, hesitation. The deliberate beat of something upright, not a quadruped's gait. What chilled him deepest wasn't the source, but how the noise synced with his actions. A shuffle of his boot on the stones prompted an answering shift from the foliage moments later. A throat clear yielded a following footfall, as if the echo had grown clever enough to predict. He cranked the lantern brighter and rose, brushing his hands on his pants. "Okay," he announced, voice firmer. "If this is someone's idea of fun, you've had your laugh. Cut it out." Nothing. Goosebumps rippled across his skin. He placed the lantern on a higher boulder for better range and fished his flashlight from the tackle box. Its stark ray sliced the blackness in a sharp wedge. He scanned the tree line side to side. Logs, foliage, underbrush. All still. No telltale glint of wildlife eyes like a deer's might offer. He was on the verge of dropping the beam when a form flickered at its periphery. It hovered elevated, perhaps 7 or 8 feet above the earth, wedged amid the trunks. Initially, it seemed like wind-tossed limb, but the breeze had faded to nil. Gradually, the outline peeled from the thicker murk, sharpening into a slender, elongated figure flush against the bark. It wasn't fully humanoid. The build felt distorted, limbs stretched excessively, joints positioned oddly from what instinct anticipated. Whatever lurked there began crouched, gripping the wood with 4 extensions. Then, in a fluid, unnatural glide, it rose, dominating the brush, its crown grazing the boughs overhead. The light trembled in his unsteady grasp, yet he held steady on the entity. Twin gleams ignited within, akin to a creature's gaze. Spaced wider than normal, positioned higher, they shimmered with an eerie, vitreous glow that twisted his gut. In that prolonged, horrific pause, both held motionless. Then it advanced. The advance made no noise, belying its bulk, no stumble or waver, just a seamless transfer of balance rippling across its form, like liquid reshaping itself. Its stance folded improperly, not fractured, merely joined unlike any familiar. An additional bend appeared where none belonged, extending toward where hands ought to end. The ray illuminated, elongated, digit-like protrusions splaying briefly on a pine surface, trailing moist streaks down the rind. Blake's mouth parched. Vaguely, he noted his retreat had begun, heels grinding against gravel. The lake lapped at his boots now, chill seeping upward. He checked the impulse. Bolting across slick rocks in pitch with water behind invited disaster. Clutching the flashlight tighter, he directed it square at the figure's head, if it qualified as such. The glare erased finer traits, but fragments emerged. The surface, assuming skin, gleamed ashen under the glare, unnaturally sleek, taut over a skeleton straddling human and feral. The luminous spots functioning as eyes tightened faintly, resembling contracting irises. No discernible mouth registered in view, yet the space between thickened oppressively, dense and weighted like a voiceless breath bearing down. "Scram!" he yelled, the outburst more instinctive than deliberate. "Beat it!" The creature cocked its head in a deliberate, pondering tilt. Then it shifted laterally, not fleeing but prowling parallel to the edge of the woods. Those earlier footfalls had faded once more, nearly drowned out by the pounding in his ears. It kept pace with him, maintaining a steady gap. Whenever he shifted position along the water's edge to better his view, it mirrored him precisely, like a distorted echo in a funhouse glass. It was shadowing his every move. He widened the flashlight's arc, secretly wishing for a glimpse of hide or horns, anything to reframe this as ordinary forest fauna. But the beam revealed only those elongated legs, the unnatural bends at the knees, the featureless pallid expanse of its torso. The lantern at his back sputtered. The abrupt flicker sent his heart slamming against his ribs. He whirled partially around, the light swinging away from the trunks, and watched the flame dance erratically in the glass enclosure, as though buffeted by a gale. Yet the night air remained calm on his skin. His hand darted toward the lantern, automatically cupping to protect it. In that split instant, the steps ceased. An absolute, attentive hush descended. He whipped back toward the tree line. Deserted. The spot where it had lingered was now mere shadow, tangled boles and limbs. His beam pierced every crevice, thrust into the bushes, scaled the textured bark. Empty. No ghostly appendage, no glint of eyes, no trace of anything larger than a buck ever haunting that space. His heartbeat roared in his skull. Deep down, he yearned to dismiss the whole episode as a hallucination, frayed nerves birthing phantoms from the gloom. But as he directed the light downward to the woodland fringe, the earth told a different tale. The damp soil, softened by fresh downpours, formed a shadowed strip amid the final stones and initial layer of pine needles. Etched across it, bold as molds in fresh concrete, were tracks. Elongated beyond human measure, yet slimmer than any bears he'd encountered. Each bore a clear heel mark and a splayed forefoot suggesting digits, but at bizarre orientations with indentations hinting at superfluous knuckles. They followed the tree line in a gentle curve that echoed his shoreline trajectory, then disappeared into denser foliage. A chill prickled his flesh. Operating on sheer reflex, Blake hauled in his fishing lines, heedless that one still carried lure. With fumbling fingers, he folded the rods and crammed them into their tube. The lantern's fire resisted, surging once in defiance before he twisted the valve and extinguished it. Night crashed down, pierced solely by faint constellations and the wavering glow of his torch. The ascent to the vehicle dragged on interminably, triple the descent's ease. Every dozen paces he paused, ears straining. The woods at his rear appeared to exhale in suspense. Once, a faint rasp echoed from his right, as if foliage grazed wood. He refused to glance. He fixed on the upcoming trail segment, then the one after, until the truck's shadowy form emerged from the timber. Keys slipped in his grip, but he unlocked the door and slipped inside. He lingered a beat, flashlight clutched in one fist, the other trembling over the starter. The interior reeked of earth, chum, and brew, everyday mortal scents. At last he turned the key. The motor bellowed awake, startling him with its volume. He avoided any final glance at the water. Shifting into drive, he accelerated away, wheels churning dirt before smoothing onto the slim rural lane. Only as the foliage sparse and distant village glows dotted the skyline did he relax his locked teeth. Months on, over drinks in a tavern when the recollection had hardened into something shareable, he confided in one soul. A former wildlife officer heard him out in silence, gaze sharpening just a touch. Upon conclusion, the fellow nursed his ale, then remarked, Quote 34. Blake never returned. On restless evenings, as vehicle beams swept his bedroom wall, he'd catch himself breathless, recalling those eyes catching his light, the entity syncing his strides flawlessly, as though Nightshade had risen to stroll beside him. And he understood. In remote bends of overlooked banks, solitude didn't guarantee invisibility to unseen eyes. Piper had lost track of just how silent her childhood town turned after dark. The prior 10 years in urban sprawls had tuned her to ceaseless choruses of alarms, horns, and midnight quarrels that rarely faded. Returning home for a week to care for her mom following a routine procedure was like wandering into a suspended moment. The roads cleared out once night fell. The closest all-night spot lay 2 communities away. And past the final stretch of homes, the hills climbed into that dense band of forest she'd heard tales about while growing up. Folks named it Pine Hollow, a title that seemed innocent enough until the full lore emerged. On her second night there, once the evening meal cleanup wrapped up and her mother nodded off before the TV, Piper ended up on the rear deck, gazing at the dark fringe of trees bordering the lawn. Crickets sang steadily. A single canine yelped from somewhere along the block. The breeze carried hints of freshly mown turf and faint campfire aroma from afar. Without much forethought, she ducked indoors, snatched a thin coat and a compact torch, then eased through the side entrance, tracing the worn gravel route that headed into the timberline. Her mom would have chimed in had she noticed. Something along the lines of staying put once twilight hits. And you recall the warnings, but Piper was 30 these days, not 13 anymore. The myth she'd gulped down as a child now struck her as mere folklore. Yet, as the final glow from the yard lamps dimmed behind her and the foliage enveloped her, she couldn't shake her grandpa's words echoing in her mind. Stroll the hollow paths during daylight hours, he'd advise. Quote 36. As a girl, that had electrified her. The notion of a spot so steeped in its own eerie legend that it demanded guidelines. They dubbed it the Whistler of Hollow Creek, an ancient yarn about an entity dwelling by the slim waterway slicing through the forest, copying known melodies to draw folks from the secure route. At times, it piped your beloved tune. Other moments, it trilled a cradle song your grandma once murmured. Venture from the track to track it down, and you'd return altered, or not at all. Children shared it during overnight gatherings. Adolescents amplified it to frighten peers around evening fires. Grown-ups dismissed it with a sigh, calling it a tool to stop young ones from straying too distant unsupervised. Piper now traced the well-known path largely from fond reminiscence rather than intent. The slim soil lane broke free from the ultimate cluster of rear gardens, vaulted a drooping metal barrier, and transformed into a true walkway beneath the boughs. The overhead branches formed a towering, thick roof. The heavens shrank to a jagged band of intensifying indigo above. The atmosphere grew chillier right away, infused with the loamy aroma of moist earth and decaying foliage. She pressed on until urban noises vanished entirely, supplanted by the reliable chorus of bugs and the remote, perpetual murmur of liquid rushing over rocks. Hollow Creek. The path ran alongside it for about a mile, occasionally nearing the flow to mere steps away, at other points rising slightly higher. The initial instance of whistling reached her while she paused on a modest wooden span, peering at the stream gliding beneath. It started subtle, barely audible, so she figured it could be an avian cry blending with some other noise. 3 tones ascending and descending in a sequence that tugged at her chest with an odd familiarity. She creased her brow and cocked her head, straining to hear. The sounds repeated, sharper now, deep and deliberate. Each lingered a touch longer than expected. She recognized the melody instantly. It took a second to pinpoint it, and once she did, her throat tightened. It matched the short motif her grandfather had whistled during their hikes along this exact route. A basic ascent and drop of 4 tones. Nothing formal, merely a habit to occupy the quiet as they ambled in easy quietude. Nobody else recalled that motif, not in that way. Piper left the bridge without fully registering her action, her footwear grinding against the pebbles. "Hey there," she said aloud, directing her light's ray into the thicket. Quote, 38. The glow sliced slim paths through the brush, illuminating bark and hanging limbs, causing shades to dance and recede. The whistling ceased. Silence followed, broken only by the stream's ripple and a abrupt high trill from a cricket startled close to her boots. She breathed out, manages a chuckle. "Ha! Good one!" she told the vacant woodland. "Likely some teen filming for TikTok with a Bluetooth." She pivoted to retreat along the trail. The whistle resumed from her left side, right past the limit of her illumination. Identical 4 tones, identical cadence. But midway, it veered into another piece. A soothing bedtime ditty her mother had crooned during Piper's childhood fevers. The one that trailed off on an open ending, leaving you to supply the remainder in your mind. Goosebumps rose on her arms. Quote 41, she shouted, aiming for a casual tone. But honestly, that's not okay. A shadow darted at the corner of her sight. Merely a deeper blotch amid the gloom, appearing then vanishing. Swiveling her beam that way revealed just a snarl of twigs and the ghostly shimmer of the creek peeking through the trunks. The rational choice would have been to head back, return home, pin the blame on a nosy neighbor, some birds, or her mind fabricating details in the blanks. Yet that mix of disquiet and determination drew her one step from the path, then a second. She convinced herself it was merely a brief peek, to confirm it was some kid's joke, after which she'd chuckle about the whole thing. The terrain shifted beneath her boots, yielding and hazardous, with roots twisting under the fallen leaves like coiled serpents. The stream's murmur intensified as she veered closer, its waters gurgling across pebbles. Her light's ray flickered, revealing glimpses of slick stones, clumps of moss, and now and then a fungus shimmering eerily white. The whistling resumed, originating from deeper within now. 2 bars of her grandfather's melody. 3 from her mother's soothing song, followed by a third element lacking any real tune, just sharp, lingering tones weaving through the branches like taut strands. "All right. Message received," she muttered, her breaths coming quicker. "So you've been eavesdropping outside the house." The notion that an intruder had lurked near enough to her family's old place to catch those intimate noises weighed like lead in her gut. Fury felt simpler than terror. She forced her way past a cluster of young trees and emerged onto the slim, sludge-covered shore by the water. The stream was barely ankle-high here at deepest, transparent enough to spot the smooth rocks below. Her beam glided over the flow, highlighting small swirls and waves. Across the way, the forest pressed thicker, its shadows distorted by the moving current. She pivoted gradually, arcing the light around completely. "That's enough," she declared. "Show yourself or cut it out." Quiet followed. Then, right at her back, mere inches from her ear, the whistle ignited once more. The abrupt proximity made her entire frame flinch. She whirled around, pulse pounding in her chest, the light slashing through vacant space. Nothing was there. No way anyone could have retreated so fast without sloshing water or snapping wood. Still, the melody lingered in the air, bouncing softly off the stream. Unmistakable. Her hand trembled, making the beam jitter. Grandpa. The word escaped unbidden, foolish and vulnerable. "Is it you?" The whistling cut off abruptly. For an instant, the forest seemed to pause alongside her. Then, from beyond the creek, buried in the thicket of trunks, another noise floated over. Her voice, or an imitation, crooning the final phrase of her mother's lullaby, the key almost accurate, yet dragged a touch too languid, overly deliberate. Piper sensed her legs buckling. She retreated a pace, and her heels skidded in the muck. She flailed an arm to avoid tumbling into the water, regained balance, and willed her lungs to steady. This defied reason. Every bit of it. The whistle's intimacy. How it leaped between personal songs like switching channels. You hear whistling at night. Ignore it. She'd already violated that wisdom. Fine, she rasped, addressing the emptiness more than any unseen presence. You've proven enough. She oriented toward the trail's presumed location and began moving, keeping the light fixed on the soil to avoid stumbles. After several strides, the stream's babble dulled, present but muffled, as if muffled by an invisible barrier. The woods appeared to crowd in more than moments before, limbs snagging at her coat. She halted and rotated deliberately. The route she'd just traversed from the edge had vanished. No trail of trampled foliage, no fractured stems. Only an endless cycle of shadowy bark dissolving into darkness. A sharp, icy dread coiled in her torso. "Don't pull this," she warned the shadows. "Just don't." Off to her side, faintly, the whistling stirred anew. This version held no familiar rhythm. The pitches climbed and dipped in a twisting sequence, repeating motifs that circled without closure. What chilled her deepest was its persistent proximity, fixed in distance, encircling her like a ring. Regardless of her facing, it lingered at the periphery of sound, outside the glow of her light. It aimed to lure her by the noise, ignoring familiar signs. She squeezed her eyes shut. Her grandfather's counsel echoed vividly, as though he stood nearby. If you're lost in there, ignore what your ears tell you. Rely on certainties. The earth, the incline, the night sky. She compelled her mind to focus. She'd left the bridge and headed left after the sound. The stream sat to her right upon reaching the shore. To return, keep the water rightward, then climb until the firm trail appeared. She blinked open, clicked off the light briefly, allowing night to envelop her. Pitch black felt overwhelming without the glow, but soon she discerned a subtle hint of clearing overhead in one spot, marginally brighter, less choked by foliage. The sound of the creek grew louder in that direction, even as the whistling attempted to weave into it. Quote 44, she whispered, veering toward the flowing water instead of the melody. Time dragged on for the following moments. She moved at a deliberate pace, her fingers lightly brushing against tree bark to stay oriented while clutching the still dark flashlight in her other hand. The whistling ebbed and surged, occasionally dipping into bits of tunes she knew all too well. Her go-to cartoon song from kid days, the somber hymn her mom used for memorial services, even that silly two-tone ping from her ancient phone announcing messages. With each one, she shoved the familiarity aside, dismissing it as mere interference. At last, the terrain started to descend. Gnarled roots shifted to slick rocks underfoot. The creek's rush built until its rhythmic pulse thrummed through her body. She flicked the flashlight alive once more. Its glow struck the stream barely 10 feet ahead. The very same section she'd lingered by before, or something eerily similar. Across the water, shadows of trees shifted in the wavy reflections. In a fleeting instant, mid-blink, a form seemed to materialize on the far side. Not human, not beast. Merely a thicker patch of shadow hinting at broad shoulders and a possible head angle. Moments later, the beam revealed nothing but limbs. The whistling cut off abruptly. A charged quiet enveloped the forest. Her breathing rasped loudly in her ears. Gradually, she swept the light along the edge until it landed on the footbridge she'd abandoned. The slender planks appeared fragile now, secured by ropes. She scrambled up to the path and refused to glance behind. It wasn't until distant yard lights flickered through the branches and her mom's home emerged at the path's end that the whistling resumed, so soft this time. A handful of notes drifting on the wind from deep in the valley. Now, however, it avoided mimicking anything familiar. It came across, Piper noted with a bone-deep shiver, as almost forlorn. She kept the encounter from her mother. When the older lady inquired about the stroll, Piper simply replied, _quote _45_, and said no more. That night, tucked in her old girlhood room, she stared into the darkness, attuned to the town's nocturnal hums. A fridge's low drone, occasional vehicles rumbling by. Off in the distance, a canine yipped briefly before going quiet. Through the narrow space where the window sash met the frame imperfectly, a draft slipped in, producing a gentle, whispering sigh. Once or twice, unintentionally, it nearly evoked the start of a song. Piper turned away, drawing the covers high, and recalled that tail rules serve a purpose. On her next outing, she'd stick strictly to the marked route. Jaden, versed in backwoods folklore, understood the most chilling accounts rarely kicked off with gore or shrieks. They began with the out-of-place. He was on day 3 of a solitary trek along an extensive trail, winding over 2 states, a narrow ribbon of compacted earth and stone cutting through federal woods, private parcels, and forgotten timberlands. By mile 71, the steady throb in his shoulders from the heavy backpack had become routine. His mind focused on basics, hydration spots, remain in daylight to the upcoming shelter. The handbook noted a designated area just beyond. Level terrain, a stone fire pit, a sturdy limb for suspending food. An ideal halt before the path ascended into steeper, craggier heights. The waning sun filtered through the canopy, casting golden bands across the landscape. A jay squawked from higher ground. The breeze carried scents of resin and a subtle, earthy hint of far-off streams. He nearly overlooked the side path. It was a subtle offshoot to the right, indicated by a modest pile of stones and a faded stake bearing a crudely etched 17. Consulting the map confirmed it. The authorized spot lay a brief detour from the primary line, hidden to prevent overuse. Jaden trailed along, his boots crunching fallen leaves, his head already running through the evening drill. Shed the load, set up shelter, purify a stream, heat a savory meal. He parted a veil of saplings and entered the open space. 2 setups occupied the area. One screamed official, A ring of scorched rocks for flames, a couple of stumps hauled over for benches, and a metal plaque fixed to a trunk displaying the trail group's emblem. The second, roughly 20 yards off and parallel to the wood's edge, appeared in use at first sight. A rounded tent squatted there, fly secured, entrances sealed. A mat for sleeping sprawled partially unfurled nearby. A compact burner designed to attach to a gas cylinder rested on a smooth boulder beside a singed cook pot. Hiking shoes and easy-wear flip-flops sat aligned by the entrance flap. A half-filled water filter bag dangled from a nearby low limb. Securely knotted food sacks hung elevated from a barren branch stretched between a pair of sturdy trees. Yet the site was deserted, no camper in sight. "Hey!" Jaden shouted, lifting his arm on instinct. "Anyone around?" Silence greeted him. He lingered, straining to catch any rustle from a figure in the foliage. Zilch. The forest encircling the open area hummed through its typical dusk routine, birds quieting their calls, bugs ramping up their chorus. The setup, tent and supplies, stood smack in the center, like a paused moment in time. Mindful not to intrude on the stranger's territory, he skirted the primary area, dropped his backpack, and assured himself this wasn't odd. Perhaps the hiker was out scooping a latrine spot, or fetching water from the stream, or chatty, or solitary. The unwritten rule was straightforward: respect boundaries until welcomed. He'd gotten his tent partially erected before it hit him how much time had elapsed. Glancing at his wristwatch, he noted nearly 40 minutes gone. Plenty to secure his shelter, rig a short drying line, and excavate his personal waste pit. He halted, stakes clutched in his fist, and tuned in once more. No footsteps, no tent zipper rasping open or shut, no hack or grumbled frustration from fiddling with a camp stove. That subtle undercurrent of discomfort sharpened. Jaden edged nearer to the adjacent spot, halting several paces from its boundary. He hailed again, voice amplified. Quote 49. Still nothing. The shelter remained motionless, not a ripple in the nylon, barely a breeze stirred. Through the fabric's subtle contours, he made out the outline of a bedroll within, topped by what seemed a compact storage pouch serving as cushioning. It all looked prepared for an imminent return, as though the occupant had merely popped off briefly. His gaze dropped to the footwear at the entrance. Dry soles, laces slack, uppers flipped out to ventilate. The flip-flops were those basic foam versions, aligned precisely toward the flap, right next to each other. The orderly arrangement sent a chill prickling his skin. He swallowed hard, then compelled himself to loop broadly, keeping well clear of the zippered panel, and scanned the earth. No fresh prints veering off, just faint marks from prior pacing around the area. No snapped twigs, no evidence of a scuffle, no stains. They must have headed back to the path, he grumbled inwardly, even as he knew he'd have spotted or heard them. Returning to his setup, he retrieved his map and trail manual, searching for mentions of alternate streams or detours. Zip. The glade and the main route were the sole landmarks charted for several miles either way. With the sunlight dipping, casting slivers of amber, then slate through the canopy gaps, the vacant shelter across the way morphed from a pier's outpost into an unsettling enigma. Once pitch blackness settled, Jaden perched on a stump beside his unused fire pit, light off his brow, allowing his vision to adapt to the gloom. Constellations winked through the boughs above. The air cooled to where his exhales fogged visibly. Cicadas and amphibians dominated the evening symphony. He'd mulled packing up and trekking farther, but the upcoming level terrain lay distant, and solo night travel in unknown woods triggered its own warnings. Quote 51, he resolved. Quote 52. To soothe his jitters, he spun a tale. The other tent's user had departed at dawn, predating any chance meeting. They'd simply abandoned gear for an overnight in civilization, planning to dismantle it later. Regulations frowned on it, sure, but folks bent them occasionally. He cycled the explanation until it rang halfway true. Midway into his bag, seal tugging against the seeping cold, the steps registered. Subtle initially, so whispery he dismissed it as gusts toying with limbs, yet they solidified. Snap, halt, snap. Advancing down the side path into the clearing. A person's gait, unhurried, steady, not faltering, like a wanderer re-entering base after a twilight stroll. A wave of ease surged, nearly buckling his knees. He peeled back his flap halfway, poked out his face, primed to offer a hello. The expanse outside lay barren. The steps persisted, though, now crisp at the fringe. They looped the border once, rustling over dead foliage and skirting the pit, then veered to the distant camp. Jaden froze, lungs tight. No motion anywhere. The unknown's dome loomed unchanged, a ghostly mound amid the shadowy woods. The entry footwear hadn't budged. The suspended provisions rocked gently in an imperceptible draft, but no figure merged with the silhouettes. The treads circled anew, this pass nearer. A growing sense of unease washed over him as he realized the noise wasn't echoing haphazardly. Instead, it followed a deliberate circuit that swept around both campsites, the route intersecting somewhere amid his shelter and the vacant one. Whenever the unseen figure crossed between them, the crunch of leaves sounded just a short distance off. Quote 53, he ventured, his voice faltering even as he tried to keep it steady. Quote 54. The steps halted abruptly. An oppressive quiet descended at once, weighing on his ears like a blanket. The crickets and other bugs appeared to hush themselves, as though the entire woods held its breath in anticipation. Quote 55. He muttered hastily, feeling like he'd intruded on something intimate. Didn't mean to catch you off guard. I didn't notice you arriving. No response came. The darkness lingered, tense and expectant. With deliberate slowness, Jaden drew the zipper shut and secured it at the base. It was a futile action. Mere mesh and flimsy fabric wouldn't deter anything insistent, but that minor shield offered a sliver of reassurance. He settled down again, pulse racing, attempting to rationalize it as wildlife. Sounds played tricks in the dark. Perhaps a deer. Possibly. The footfalls picked up once more. This round left no room for denial. They brushed past his tent by mere inches. The pressure of each stride pressed into the earth, vibrating faintly up through his slender sleeping mat. They looped around once, then again, maintaining an unvarying cadence. No heavy breathing, no hoof taps, no brush of hide through foliage, just the purposeful gait of a person on the move. On the next circuit, heading toward the deserted spot, another noise emerged. a soft drag, reminiscent of nails gliding over stretched fabric. It trailed gradually along his tent's flank, from top to bottom, as if an unseen presence was gauging his outline. His breath caught in his throat. The rasping halted level with his shoulder, precisely where his torso lifted and dropped in shallow, erratic heaves. For an instant, a nauseating conviction gripped him. Whatever it was hovered nearby, attuned to his every inhale. Then, the noise receded, the steps grinding off in the direction of the empty shelter. Jaden remained stiff, muscles taut, as the hours dragged on interminably. The disturbances persisted intermittently, orbits through the open area, sporadic gentle knocks on the material. At one point, a metallic ting as an object nudged his hiking staffs. Each time he sensed the cycle breaking, the entity departing, it would start anew. Eventually, fatigue pulled him into a shallow, broken slumber. He stirred to the soft glow seeping through the nylon and the routine dawn song of birds. In a foggy moment, he wondered if it had all been a nightmare. Then he propped himself up and spotted the subtle marks on the tent's interior. 4 slim grooves etched along the spot where he'd slept, like nails or talons had raked the surface, applying just sufficient force to etch into the grime and moisture. Nausea twisted in his gut. He undid the flap and emerged into the glade. The neighboring setup seemed altered. The structure remained upright, yet the orderly placement of equipment had shifted. Footwear lay toppled and scattered, one boot tipped over. The flip-flops had vanished. The cooker rested overturned on the dirt, with its pan spilled beside it. The food suspension line swayed freely from the limb, its tip hovering over a ripped sack of provisions. Contents dumped out, but untouched. Footprints were visible now. They wove across the exposed soil between the 2 locations, jumbled too much to discern any distinct trail. A few resembled sneaker soles, others bare soles, and some defied easy description, lengthy prints lacking defined heels or toes. He broke camp on instinct, movements automatic. Once his backpack was strapped tight and waist secured, he paused in the middle of the space, compelling his mind to focus. Bolting without alerting authorities gnawed at his conscience. Abandoning a forsaken outpost to fade into obscurity troubled him more. He captured images with his cell, the shelter, the disordered items, the tracks. After a final scan to ensure his own area was pristine, he retraced his path to the access trail. His heartbeat quickened with every stride, distancing him from the deceptive security of the wide space. Miles on, at the initial overlook featuring a signboard and logbook, a parked vehicle sat at the lot's perimeter. The attendant, propped against it with a mug, heard him out in silence as he recounted the discovery. Her face tightened progressively with every fact. Quote, 57, she inquired once he wrapped up by the stream. He confirmed with a nod. She exhaled wearily. Quote, 58, he declined. Quote, 59. She offered no pushback. As he started away, she called after him. Quote, 60. Quote, 61, he said flatly. Quote, 62, Jaden quipped, trying for a feeble joke. She gazed beyond him into the woods. Out there by yourself, people spot odd sights. Often the truth is harsh enough on its own. Several months afterward, while browsing the trail group's site, Jaden noticed a short update tucked amid various announcements. Campsite at mile 17 shut down temporarily for repairs. Nothing about left-behind equipment. Nothing about vanished trekkers. He never learned who owned that tent. On restless nights in his city apartment, miles from any woods, Jaden would shut his eyes and relive the purposeful loop of those invisible footfalls, the gentle scrape of an entity outlining him against the flimsy fabric. He pictured some future backpacker days or weeks later, stumbling upon that very spot as twilight fell, thankful for level ground and a stone circle for flames, only to sense the initial chill that solitude wasn't as complete as the trail guide implied. Aurora had forever favored secondary routes over interstates. Major roads seemed like assembly lines, swift, streamlined, and devoid of feeling. Lesser paths twisted and sloped, threading through genuine communities where locals truly resided. Raised in countryside areas, she'd mastered navigating them early on, beams from her lights following known bends during late-night returns from whatever gig she was handling at the time. She knew the foggy sections, the slippery turns that frosted quickest, the stretches to approach cautiously around deer season. Routine, rather than thrill, guided her onto the access lane that evening. She'd lingered at the cafe, subbing for a colleague whose childcare had canceled. When she finally cleared the final booth and secured the entrance, the clock read after 11. The direct path meant sticking to the primary highway, yet the access route shaved off 15 minutes. It got bumpy at spots, mainly for timber haulers and rangers, but she'd traversed it hundreds of times. She could map every rut and crater with her eyes shut. The junction appeared as a subtle break in the foliage, signaled by a weathered steel sign. Out of reflex, Aurora signaled left despite the empty road behind, then guided her vehicle onto the slimmer asphalt. The surroundings closed in right away. No lamps along the edges, no shining barriers. Just her paired beams, piercing forward amid shadowy evergreens. She lowered the radio to a faint hum and concentrated on the path's gentle climbs and drops. Beyond the windows, the darkness pressed heavy against the panes, a dense void that devoured all but the hardiest points of light. About 5 miles in, the emergency signals caught her eye. They pulsed ahead through the gloom, a steady orange flicker curving into view. Aurora gripped the steering wheel harder without thinking. A vehicle blocking this lane so late screamed either a neighborhood rig or a seriously misguided outsider. As she navigated the turn, her lights flooded the obstruction. A metallic gray 4-door sat crooked, front wheels dipping into the embankment, back half blocking her side. Every blinker throbbed in unison. The operator's side hung ajar, flung out fully. The cabin lamp shone inside, casting light on an unoccupied driver's area. Quote 63, she whispered to herself, gut clenching. She eased to nearly a stop and halted several vehicle widths away, motor humming softly. For an instant she remained seated, fingers poised above the dash, brain flipping through possibilities. A collision with wildlife, prompting a search. Engine failure, leading to a hike for bars. Or a sudden need to bolt. She activated her own flashers and shifted to neutral. The lane was too tight to edge past without scraping anyway. Plus, if injury was involved here, passers-by ignoring it wouldn't bring aid swiftly. "All right," she murmured aloud, as though voicing it might calm her nerves. Fast scan. Peak. Report. Return to the seat. The blackness engulfed her the second she stepped out. Her indicators clicked sharply, syncing with her heartbeat. Chilly, moist breeze met her cheeks, laced with resin aroma and a subtle tang, like old iron. She snatched her compact torch from the dash compartment, switched it on, and advanced toward the disabled auto, boots grinding against the stones. Nearer inspection made the setup seem more off-kilter. No hum from the motor, yet the fob dangled in the slot, swaying as if jostled recently. Operator's cushion vacant. Front companion's empty, too. A partly drunk water container rested in the console, moisture droplets clinging to its surface. "Anyone there?" Aurora shouted, her tone pitching up more than intended. "Everything all right? Assistance needed?" Nothing. She swung the light in an arc. The route sliced through raised banks overgrown with shrubs. Past the far edge of the stopped car, the verge sloped down into the underbrush. That's when the traces emerged. Scuff lines. Parallel scars gouged the gravel and soil, stretching from the sedan's open driver's door into the shadowy expanse beneath the trees. In the middle, a broad swath of churned earth suggested a massive, cumbersome object had been dragged along, perhaps a corpse or an unwieldy burden. The trails vanished into the thicket roughly 10 feet from the pavement. Aurora's mouth turned parched. She edged forward a single hesitant step, her flashlight tracing the path until overhanging limbs obstructed the sight. The foliage ahead rustled faintly, a soft rustle of foliage that might pass for a breeze, yet the surrounding air hung heavy and motionless. Her every nerve urged her to retreat, return to the vehicle, secure the locks, accelerate away. She gulped down her fear, resisting the impulse to bolt. Pivoting away from the wooded gloom felt like bearing her back to a corridor lined with invisible watchers. Instead, she retreated 2 deliberate paces, directing the light beam forward. Upon reaching her car's front end, she sidestepped, fingers fumbling blindly for the door latch. Suddenly, headlights blazed in her mirror. Another vehicle rounded the curve she'd navigated, its high beams piercing the night with a harsh, overwhelming glow. Aurora recoiled, shielding her eyes from the brightness. The arriving dark truck eased to a halt several yards back, its motor growling softly. The lights remained fixed, trapping her like prey between the illumination and the abandoned car. Her pulse raced wildly. She mustered a wave, aiming for the demeanor of an everyday motorist facing mechanical woes. "Hey!" she shouted, raising her voice to pierce the rumble. "Seems like there's been an issue here. I was just checking it out." The truck's doors swung open. 2 shapes emerged. Clad in somber attire and low-slung baseball caps, their features dissolved into obscurity. One clutched an item that Aurora's mind sluggishly identified, the slender shaft and broad edge of a shovel in his outline, while the other bore the heft of an elongated duffel bag, its form drooping at the center. They moved without haste, no flicker of astonishment at her presence on this forsaken stretch. They paused briefly, eyes adjusting to the night silhouetted against their own glare. Then, with an unsettling synchronization, both heads swiveled in her direction. A profound chill gripped Aurora's core. Quote 68, one inquired, his tone even and audible across the gap. Quote 69. Her voice caught in her constricted throat. Yeah, she replied, wincing at its fragile pitch. Came upon this vehicle abandoned, no sign of anyone. The duffel carrier dipped his head in acknowledgement. We can assist, he offered. No reason to linger in this spot. Risky after dark. He advanced a pace. His companion mirrored him. The shovel's edge flashed momentarily in the light. The scripted precision of their actions, devoid of any shock, shattered Aurora's fragile hope of dismissing this as routine. Folks stumbling on a deserted auto didn't arrive equipped with a spade and a bulging sack. They'd anticipated solitude at this sight. Her fingers tightened on her door grip. Quote 70 she fabricated, the lie spilling out ahead of her racing mind. Quote 71. The pair halted momentarily. Tension hung in the air, unmoving. Then the shovel-bearer adjusted his hold subtly, the motion deceptively relaxed, yet now the blade tilted downward, nearer to his body, as if concealing it. Quote 72, he remarked. Quote 73. Aurora feigned nonchalance with a shoulder lift. Connected without a hitch. They even tracked my position. It was pure deception, but she noted a subtle shift in their stances, a subtle tension, a quick mental pivot. Schemes banking on remoteness recoiled from the notion of a traceable signal. In the background, the truck's engine purred steadily, its fumes curling faintly in the beams. Beyond the gleaming sedan, the path lay open. Her hand located the door release. She jerked it wide in a swift jerk, interposing the steel barrier between herself and the strangers. Better shift my vehicle so they can pass when they show, she announced, striving for casual poise. You know how they hate a backed-up route. Without pausing for their reply, she slipped behind the wheel, shut the door with force, engaged the locks, and twisted the key in a seamless rush. Her lights still burned, throwing an oblique glow down the embankment. Within that beam, the draglines sharpened into focus, the jagged gravel tiers, the irregular stains of deeper hue. The motor roared to life. In the mirror, the men lingered statue still, an instant past natural. Then momentum surged. She shifted into reverse, warnings flashing and arced broadly, retreating past the sedan with haste over precision. Tires kicked up stones in a gritty spray. For a terrifying split second, she imagined scraping the other vehicle and trapping herself against it. Her bumper just barely missed it by inches. She corrected her course, switched to drive, and floored the accelerator. In the rearview mirror, the pickup's beams jerked erratically as the guys hurried back to their ride. She didn't stick around to check if they got in. She was already speeding up the fire road, with trees flashing by at the periphery of her sight. Her grip trembled on the steering wheel, yet her eyes remained fixed on the narrow strip of asphalt stretching forward. Through the mirror, the harsh twin beams of the high beams flared brightly, then stabilized as the truck swung out to pursue her. Naturally, they gave chase. The path wound and dropped sharply, providing few chances to shake them off without the danger of veering into the blackness. Aurora held her velocity just shy of dangerous, braking sharply for the bends and surging ahead on the straightaways. The truck hung at a consistent gap, neither closing in to tail her nor dropping away. Matching her rhythm, her thoughts spiraled in panic. A wreck would put them at the scene first. Halting on purpose or by accident meant they'd approach with their shovel, bag, and whatever else lurked inside. A light emerged ahead, a subtle orange shimmer over the treetops, signaling the nearby settlement. Her chest ached as though she'd sprinted a marathon, even though she'd stayed planted in her seat. She latched onto that light like a beacon of hope, ticking off the known landmarks, the weathered quarry marker, the stream crossing, the worn slow-down warning on its tilted pole. When the initial homes dotted the landscape amid sparse tree cover, she decided, rather than veering onto the side route straight to her place, she continued along the primary route toward the town's border gas station, the sole spot lit up this late. Its harsh fluorescence hummed defiantly in the gloom, resembling a docked vessel. Pulling into the parking area, she spotted a couple of vehicles at the pumps and the attendant clear through the window. She eased up to the entrance and came to a halt, hazards flashing, motor still humming. The pickup cruised by on the thoroughfare without entering. Its lights briefly flooded the station's facade before fading in the side view until they blended with other distant red taillights in the shadows. Aurora remained frozen, fingers fused to the wheel, until the worker stepped out and rapped on her glass, worry creasing his forehead. It was only then that she noticed the tears streaming down her face. Afterward, perched at a modest table indoors with a mug of stale coffee going cold, she recounted the ordeal to the responding officer jotting her report. He absorbed it all, lids low, teeth gritted, and muttered a curse when she mentioned the skid marks and the abandoned vehicle. Quote 76, he replied cautiously. Quote 77. You did right by heading here immediately, he added. Quote 78, she pressed, a touch of wild chuckle creeping in. Quote 79. He denied it with a shake. Quote 80. During the escorted trip back in the patrol car, Aurora observed the passing highway lamps and reflected on every occasion she'd picked the secluded path. All those evenings when the fire road seemed like a handy cut through vacant terrain, and how, for that brief spell in the wilds, it had turned into an ambush for anyone too trusting of the night. She avoided it from then on. On certain weekends, catching the far-off wail of sirens heading to the wooded ridges, she'd envision that gleaming sedan with its blinkers on, door ajar, silent woods in the distance, and ponder how many tales on that stretch wrapped up silently before a voice could share them. After 5 years as a couple, Colton and Mackenzie knew their quarrels peaked when exhaustion set in. The notion of an extended backpacking adventure had seemed idyllic in theory. Disconnect from the world, divide the load across their packs, camp for 3 evenings on a defined circuit in the state woods. But come the second day's later hours, the charm had worn thin amid aching backs, raw feet, and a trail steeper than the guide promised. The spat ignited from a minor detour, an unintended wrong turn tacking on another mile that escalated as tempers frayed on empty stomachs. Upon reaching a slim vantage along the crest, words had dwindled to near silence between them. Colton pressed on, tension knotting his steps. Mackenzie trailed, pausing repeatedly to fiddle with her straps and choke down her irritation. Whatever, he'd barked back at her once. She'd fired off in reply, though it left a bitter aftertaste of surrender. The path ahead was straightforward, a distinct path tracing the ridge's backbone, marked by white paint on trunks at regular intervals. The evening air carried a crisp, elevated sharpness, with golden sunlight filtering through the treetops. Far off and down below, a stream caught the light in fleeting sparkles. Colton kept moving until his breath steadied and the tension in his torso eased. Being alone brought a secretive pleasure. No need to match strides with anyone, no remarks about his constant time-checking, just the reliable thud of his footsteps and the soft whisper of leaves in the woods. His phone vibrated in the pouch at his waist. He scowled. Earlier at lunch, there'd been 0 bars, that tiny symbol flatly declaring no connection. Yet habit made him pull it out anyway and glance at the display. A single unread text from Mackenzie. Leave the path. Discovered something. He halted. The message was time-stamped barely a minute earlier. At first, he figured she meant a superior spot for camp, perhaps a detour to an overlook, but the wording stirred an icy knot beneath his sternum. It didn't ring true to her style. No emojis, no playful add-on, merely that stark command. He typed back quickly. "What is it?" No typing indicators popped up. No delivery ticks shifted. The signal remained a faint, unyielding X. He pivoted gradually, eyes sweeping the timberline on both sides of the route. The path followed the ridgeline, with woods plunging sharply downward in either direction. Occasional faint animal tracks veered across the slope, though none resembled a marked side path. To his right, the foliage parted slightly, exposing a cluster of ferns and a shadowy opening further in. His phone hummed once more. "Move quickly." Only a short distance inside. His throat tightened. Logically, he knew messages rarely transmitted in signal voids like this. They waited in limbo for coverage to return. Their arrival here defied that logic. Yet the anxious, lingering part of him, the one buzzing with unresolved irritation and worry, hinted she might have uncovered a genuine gem, a cascade, an ancient structure, anything to soften their earlier clash. "Quote 84, he shouted, voice echoing slightly. "Whereabouts?" The trees swallowed the call, returning only a muffled rebound and no reply, no rustling response. He advanced 2 paces toward the tree break. The brush there was oddly sparse, hinting at a faint, worn root. He paused at the brink, one foot suspended over the soft moss. From behind, on the trail, foliage snapped underfoot. He whirled abruptly, his backpack almost yanking him sideways. The spot stood vacant. The trail extended barren ahead and behind, speckled with fading rays. He spotted the bend he'd traversed and, dimly, a trail marker on a far-off tree. No motion anywhere. The device vibrated yet again. "I hear you. Simply step from the path." The sentence hit like a weight in his stomach. Colton gulped and retreated from the opening until his soles met the reassuring firmness of the dirt track once more. Ignoring the message, he jammed the phone away and quickened his pace, tracing the markers. Every so often he'd peek at the screen. Still no bars, no further alerts. About a half-mile prior, Mackenzie had paused to rebandage a blister on her foot when her phone shook. She grimaced, yanking her boot on with one hand while eyeing the alert. Fresh message from Colton. "Leave the path. Discovered something." She huffed, a brief, skeptical noise. Quote, 85. She grumbled under her breath. The phrasing looked off on the display. No pin drop, no laugh or must-see vibe. Just the lone directive. Her finger lingered above the keys. Instead, she screened it off and tucked it aside. Moments later, another vibration. For real, check it out. Incredible. She knit her brows. The bar's icon read empty. Zero data. No network. These shouldn't be delivering. Perhaps they'd ascended sufficient height to snag a weak signal from some remote antenna. Maybe Ken's. The call drifted up from the hillside to her left. Colton's timbre carrying that edge he hid when impatience crept in. She spun around, a blend of vexation and gladness spiking her pulse. Quote, 86 she yelled. Quote, 87, silence. The slope's vegetation clustered densely in spots. But gaps between trunks offered clear sight lines, no sign of him visible nearby. Ken's below, came the voice again, nearer now, slightly winded as if from a quick dash to scout. She edged to the trail's lip. The terrain fell away sharply, yet protruding roots provided handholds for a careful drop. She scanned downward, hand visor against the angled glow. Quote 89, quote 90, he replied. Quote 91. The sound's origin kept changing. Sometimes it rose straight from beneath, other times veering laterally, weaving amid the trunks. Pinpointing it felt like chasing audio in pitch blackness. The path felt off-kilter, refusing to match the landscape she could see. Her cell phone buzzed once more. Believe me, it's secure. A slender ribbon of dread twisted through her gut. Colton always played it extra safe on the hike. He wouldn't claim anything was okay without verifying it 3 times over. Plus, his texts never sounded like that. Too rigid. Unnatural. Quote, 93 voice echoed again, now coming from right behind her. She whirled around. The trail stretched empty in both directions. Her pulse pounded wildly in her chest. She retreated a pace, her boots grinding against the loose stones. Abruptly, the standard warnings from countless hiking seminars flashed vividly in her thoughts. Stay on the designated route even if you hear noises. Don't rely on your device in signal blackouts. When instincts scream wrong, trust them. They usually are. She tilted her head up and called out firmly, Colton, if that's you, show yourself on the path. Nothing. Then, the voice drifted from a distance, muffled as if from another space. You're making this hard again. She stayed silent. Turning away, she strode purposefully ahead, eyes fixed on the trail markers. The device continued vibrating sporadically as she pushed on. She tuned it out until the mounting worry over unread alerts gnawed at her too much. At last, topping a gentle hill and spotting the open area signaling the official camping spot up front, she fished it from her pocket. 6 texts waited, all supposedly from Colton. Step away from the path. Quit dodging me, I told you. Believe me, you'll regret missing this. Kenzie's, why flee? Her fingers trembled. The sight looked reassuringly routine. Level ground for shelters, a stone fire pit, a fallen trunk for benches. No other campers in sight. She let her backpack slump heavily to the earth, pivoted gradually, and peered into the surrounding woods. Just the typical rustle of foliage stirred. 5 minutes passed before footsteps crunched along the trail. She gripped her walking stick like an improvised club, throat tight with fear. Yet as the shape emerged from the bend, It was Colton himself, tangible and real, shirt soaked with perspiration, breathing hard. He halted abruptly at the sight of her raised stick. "Easy. It's just me. How much time have you spent up here?" she pressed, gasps punctuating her words. He looked startled by her edge. "Not sure. Maybe 60 minutes. Headed directly this way. Struggled to catch any bars." He drew his phone from a pocket, display shattered, power fading. Its messaging showed 0-cent items. She displayed her screen. He gaped at the conversation, his complexion paling. "Those aren't from me." They lingered there quietly, the woodland crowding in around the glade, twilight noises resuming as if on signal. At length, in a hushed tone, Mackenzie murmured, "Whatever it was, it wanted me off the trail. It tried pulling me too." He replied softly, recounting the odd texts he'd gotten, the steps on barren soil, how the trees appeared to edge nearer during his stop by that break in the branches. No debates followed that evening. They set up the shelter smack in the middle of the spot, positioned to spot path signs both ways. Food got suspended high, water purified, routine camp tasks handled, all while speaking softly. Devices powered off, faces averted, power sources removed. Out in the shadows past the campfire's glow, amid the thick, uncharted underbrush, a twig cracked with the measured shift of something heavy. Then, paces orbited the site once, just out of view as Mackenzie's phone, dead and batteryless, rang from inside her bag's side pouch. A lively, upbeat chime unlike any she'd known from her model. They froze completely. Neither stirred to investigate. Over the following years, sharing the tale selectively with close confidants, they invariably stressed the key takeaway, even cloaking it in humor. Guides and markers weren't merely for navigation. At times, they formed the sole barrier keeping you from whatever lurked in the wilds, eager to strand you.